The wind moved slowly across the wide Arizona plains, carrying with it the whisper of dust and memory. In a small ranch house, far from the noise of the world, an old man named Samuel Carter lay dying. His breath came shallow, his skin drawn tight against his bones, his once strong hands trembling with every exhale. The window beside his bed framed the desert, endless, golden, and cruelly beautiful. He had loved this land once, and he had fought for it too. Fought for it against men, against drought, against time, and once, long ago, against the Apache. That memory still burned deepest of all. Years ago, when he was young and proud, Samuel had been part of a small militia that rode into the canyons after a band of Apache families accused of raiding cattle. They had gone in full of anger and certainty, rifles gleaming under the sun. But what they found were women and children hiding in fear. Samuel never forgot the cries that echoed off the stone walls when the shooting started. He told himself for decades that it had been duty. Yet the guilt, like a thorn buried deep, never stopped pricking his soul. As age claimed his body, regret claimed his peace. He lived alone after his wife passed, his sons gone to the cities, leaving him with only the company of the wind and the ghosts of his choices. He didn't have anyone left, no family nearby, no friends who visited. Just the slow ticking of the old clock on the wall, counting down to silence. Then, one evening, when his illness worsened and he could no longer walk without collapsing, the door creaked open. She stepped in quietly, carrying a small basket. Her hair was black as raven feathers, braided down her back. Her skin was bronze, her eyes deep and calm like the river after a storm. She wore a faded shawl with Apache beadwork, and the moment Samuel saw her, his heart clenched. He remembered those same eyes from years ago, not hers exactly, but her mother's. He couldn't breathe for a moment. She was one of them. One of the people he had once called the enemy. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, her voice steady and kind, "the town nurse sent me. I take care of elders out here." He wanted to tell her to leave. He wanted to raise his hand and point her toward the door, but his strength was gone, and something in her eyes held him still. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, coughing hard. "You don't know what kind of man I was." "I know enough," she replied simply. "And I know you need help." For days she came. She cleaned his small house, tended the fire, and fed him when he was too weak to lift a spoon. She said little, and he said less. The silence between them was thick with history. Every time she washed his hands, the scars of her people flashed before his eyes, the raids, the loss, the screams. Yet she never showed bitterness. There was only gentleness in her movements, a quiet patience that humbled him more than any sermon ever could. Her name, he learned, was Naya. Her grandmother had survived the same massacre Samuel was part of. She didn't say it outright, but he knew. The way she looked at the hills beyond the window told him she carried those memories, inherited through pain and whispered stories. He wanted to confess, to tell her what he had done, but shame chained his tongue. How could he ask forgiveness from the granddaughter of the people he'd wronged? How could he deserve her care? One night, the wind grew wild. Thunder rolled over the plains like old anger waking. Samuel woke from a fever dream, gasping for air. Naya was beside him instantly, her cool hand on his forehead. "Easy," she murmured. "It's just the storm." But Samuel's eyes were wide with fear, not of death, but of the past. "I did terrible things," he whispered. "You shouldn't waste your kindness on me." Naya looked at him for a long time, then said, "My grandmother used to say, hatred is the only fire that never warms you. It only burns you from the inside. Maybe it's time to let it go." He turned his head toward her, tears welling in eyes that hadn't cried in 40 years. "You don't understand." I understand more than you think," she interrupted gently. "My people have carried hurt for generations. But we've also carried forgiveness. It's how we survived." Her words fell into him like rain on parched soil. The next morning, Samuel woke to sunlight flooding the room. The air was calm again. Naya was outside, gathering herbs from the small patch of earth near the porch. He watched her through the window, her movements graceful and deliberate. For the first time in years, he felt something that wasn't guilt, it was peace, fragile but real. He called her in and asked, voice trembling, "Will you sit with me a while?" She nodded and took the chair beside his bed. For hours they talked. He told her about his wife, about the ranch, about how he had once believed the land could be owned. She told him about her grandmother, who taught her that the land owns everyone in the end. The conversation was slow, full of pauses, but each word seemed to lift a stone off his chest. As the sun dipped low, painting the desert gold, he said quietly, "There's something I need to do before I die." She tilted her head. "What is it?" "I buried a piece of your people's past," he said. "After the raid, there was a small bundle, cloth with beads, one of the women dropped it. I didn't understand its meaning then. But I kept it, it's in the chest under the floorboard." Naya's breath caught. Slowly, she went to the corner of the room, lifted the board, and opened the old chest. Inside lay a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth, the beads dull but still glimmering faintly in the light. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a necklace of carved stones and feathers. Her hands trembled. "This belonged to my grandmother," she whispered. "She told me she lost it that day." Samuel's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to return it all my life," he said. "But I was afraid to face what I did." She looked at him, her expression unreadable, and then she knelt beside his bed. "You've carried this guilt long enough. Thank you for keeping it safe." She placed the necklace gently around her own neck, then took his hand. "Now you can rest." That night, Samuel slept peacefully for the first time in decades. When he woke, his breathing was shallower than before. The light outside was soft and golden. Naya sat by the window, humming an old Apache song, low, steady, like the hum of the earth itself. He listened, his eyes glistening, and said, "That song, I heard it once, in the canyon." "Before everything," she nodded. "It's a song for crossing." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'm almost there." Hours passed in quiet. The clock ticked, the fire whispered, and the desert wind sighed against the walls. Near evening, Samuel stirred and looked at Naya. "One last thing," he murmured. "When I'm gone, don't bury me on the ranch. Take my ashes to the canyon. The one with red cliffs. Let them rest there. Maybe I can finally give something back." Naya's eyes filled with tears. "I will," she promised. That was his final request. Before dawn, his breathing slowed, then stopped. The old ranch house fell silent except for the soft wind moving through the open door. Naya sat beside him, holding his hand until it grew cold. Then, with the first light of morning, she began her journey. 2 days later, she stood at the edge of the canyon, the same place where her grandmother had once run for her life. The rocks glowed red in the sunrise, and the air was still. She carried a small clay pot with Samuel's ashes and the same beaded cloth that had been her grandmother's. Kneeling, she placed them together beneath a juniper tree. "He feared us once," she whispered. "But in the end, he found peace among us." She sang the same song again, her voice carrying over the canyon. The wind caught it, twining it through the cliffs as if the earth itself was listening. For a moment, she imagined she could feel him there, lighter, freer, no longer bound by shame or pain. When she rose to leave, the sun broke over the ridge, bathing the land in gold. It felt as though the desert itself was forgiving him. Months later, people in the nearby town talked about the Apache woman who had cared for the old rancher in his final days. Some said she was sent by fate. Others said it was just coincidence. But those who knew Samuel Carter before, the bitter, solitary man who never smiled, spoke of how his face had softened in the last weeks, as if he had finally seen something he'd been blind to all his life. Naya returned often to the canyon, bringing small wildflowers and laying them where his ashes rested. It wasn't about honoring a man who had once caused her people pain, it was about honoring the peace that had finally come to both sides. In that quiet place, under the vast sky, the past no longer divided them. The land had taken back what it always owned, the sorrow, the forgiveness, the love that outlives even death. And so, the story of the rancher and the Apache woman became part of the wind's whisper, carried across the desert for those who still listen. It was not a story of enemies, but of healing. Not of revenge, but of grace. She had every reason to hate him, but instead, she gave him mercy. And in doing so, she gave both their souls freedom.